This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. Dan O'Brien, K-State grain economist, begins today's show with a grain market update. He discusses weakening corn prices and strengthening soybean prices locally, and a mostly balanced outlook from the futures markets. We continue today's show with an update on the Black Sea region with K-State associate in the Department of Agricultural Economics, Antonina Broyaka. Antonina's discussion focuses on the ongoing impacts of Russia's war against Ukraine and shares information on the current condition of agricultural land and the ever-evolving trade dynamics at hand that highly impact Ukraine's economy. We end today's show with this week's agricultural weather report from K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. Chip highlights the freezing temperatures that were widespread across the state last week, the amount of rain observed in southwest Kansas, and the potential for more rain on the horizon. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are joined now by K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien for this week's grain market update. And Dan, before we get into things, thank you so much, as always, for joining us today.
Thank you, Samantha. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Always appreciate the opportunity to hear from you. And today, like we always do, I understand we want to start with some futures outlooks and what the last week has kind of shown in those market areas.
With rains coming on, a general assumption of transition from a drier, for us anyway, La Nina to a generally wetter for the U.S. El Nino, I think that the markets are displaying that they're less worried than maybe they have been in the past about dry summer coming in. I still think there's just a bunch of questions to be answered about the size of the central southern plains wheat crop, running from Texas to Oklahoma to Kansas, parts of Nebraska, Colorado, you name it. But I think we'll have a chance to refocus on that in the upcoming Kansas Wheat Tour in about 2 weeks. So all that will be there to look at. We'll answer the question for wheat. Does rain make grain? Well, most of the time it does, unless there's been enough damage in that wheat crop and poor enough stands that it would mitigate that. So when you ask about the broader issues of what's happened this week, I think general downtrend in the grain markets. We've had a lot of discussions of late about international grain trends, and you and I have talked about this in the past with regard to Russia-Ukraine issues, and we're still debating in kind of a political football manner whether we'll have trade coming out of Ukraine or not. Will they stop that? I think the term brinksmanship is just prime to add to that geopolitical brinksmanship, getting down to the end and extricating, wringing out what you can get from other parties in high-level negotiations. So all that's in play. And I would say, since we're talking about futures trends, like for corn futures, May corn, which is just about to go off the board, it's not so much, I guess, off the board, but into its delivery period. We'll start to look at the July contract. But it had been down early March to about 608, had jumped up to just about 685 or so. About 2-3 weeks ago now has receded back to about 627. So the fall off we've seen is within the range of where we've been. If we start to go below 608, 610, thereabouts, that's when we'd be all that much more worried. For wheat, the May contract, we're down to 778.75 on yesterday's close, and that's almost exactly where we were in early March. So where we go in the next few days is pretty important. If we break lower than that, by the time today's close on Friday is done, then it'll be concerning. So important times to look at. And for soybeans, really pretty similar to corn. We had been down to about, on the May contract, down to about 1405 thereabouts, again in mid-March, had jumped up to as high as about 1530, have come back down yesterday to close at 1426. So, we're within a day's trade to the downside of moving below where we'd recently been. And when you look at expectations for South America's crop to come through, for Brazil's crop to come through as strong as it is, it's hard to bet against that would happen unless there's some surprise and the harvest results aren't as robust as they had been talking about.
Of course, the flip side of, Brazil's harvest, which is coming up, Argentina, of course, short on their crop, as we've been talking about, most likely not a good situation in their neck of the woods.
It's really a comparative horse race between the great results that the market is expecting out of Brazil and the bad and getting worse results that are coming out of Argentina. When you look at South America as a whole, you have basically kind of a balanced outcome between where we were a year or so ago. But again, we keep getting more reports out of Argentina that the soybean crop could move lower. And by their internal reports, they're lowering their crop estimates. What will the USDA do coming up in that May 12th report? So we'll be looking at that issue for both corn and for soybeans down there. It's hard for, I guess, all but the most number-driven market analysts to really have a balanced view of what's going on down there when you have these two behemoths in that part of the world ending up with their crops going in different directions. So it's something to watch for us, and it does affect us as we'll come into the next 30 to 60 days is when we see finally what the results of those crops are and how they affect foreign trade and some of our supply-demand balances.
Sure, especially as, we're getting our crops in the ground here. We've got a large percentage of these crops being planted currently in Kansas. And with the hard freeze of, a week or so ago now, we're going to be talking about some of those issues with Ignacio Ciampiti next week and kind of how to check your fields to make sure everything's still growing as it should. So stay tuned for that if you're interested. But, just a lot of things to consider right now, as always.
We try to watch local basis levels, and you've seen some real weakness start to appear in corn basis, a downturn in a lot of key locations in the Colby and Northwest Kansas. You've seen a trend downward in the last 1 or 2 weeks. Well, basis levels recorded last Wednesday on the 26th of April. Really a sharp drop off for the last couple of weeks, but especially this last week in near Wright, Kansas, in that region. Salina continuing to trend down. A sharp drop off in Hutchinson area. Topeka trending lower. More of a sharp drop off in Columbus. So I guess I wonder what that means. I know the futures have been dropping off as well. I don't know that local demand is necessarily dropping off anymore unless we really were filled up with that. We have sold off a lot of cattle feeding numbers may be affected. Some worries about what ethanol demand will be going down the road, I guess. But overall, you stand back and look at what's happening locally around Kansas. The weakening of basis is kind of and especially coming in the time frame when normally when farmers are on the tractors, we tend to see basis to actually become stronger just to try to entice them to act. So I know what we've done in the last week. I wonder where we'll be in May 1st to May 15th when we're planting so much corn, and we'll see what the basis does then. I would add in, now, for as much weakness as there is in some of these areas on corn basis that's happening, for soybeans in kind of a surprising manner, we've seen basis levels start to turn to the higher side. And that's not necessarily because of tremendous exports. We just, we're kind of so-so. We do have concerns of expanding biodiesel production, probably affecting that market some. So at the same time that we'll be planting soybeans in about a month. Most of the time after we get the corn planted, we look at sorghum and soybeans the latter part of May. But even with that, we're starting to see, for instance, in the Colby area, in Columbus, in Topeka, parts of the state where we're actually seeing that the local basis, which is the differential between the futures and the cash, start to strengthen some. So that's kind of a welcome thing for anybody still holding soybeans, and perhaps will give new crop marketers something positive to work with as we head on down the road.
Sure. Ignacio was sharing with me not too long ago an interesting trend where people are planting soybeans earlier than they used to in the past. So maybe that's some symptoms of that, maybe, seeing some strengthening in those areas where they're getting soybeans in the ground a bit earlier.
Well, that could be the case. I guess when we look at the soybean to corn price ratio in Kansas, and you see what areas of the state that we'd have soybean prices stronger than others relative to corn, that for new crop bids, you look at the Salina area where it have a ratio of 2.3 of November 23 soybeans to December corn, 2.3, 2.4 in Topeka, 2.36 in Columbus. In those areas, that's giving all that much more of a signal for the markets, encouraging people to plant soybeans in terms of new crop bids. The place where they need the most feed grains, corn or sorghum, would be in southwest Kansas, and that ratio is 1.95. Generally, we look at 2.3 as kind of a neutral area, where it's kind of a break even between the two. So in Garden City and Colby, definitely new crop corn prices a little stronger relative to new crop soybean prices. Of course, that's out here in the western third of the state too, so that makes sense, I guess.
Some interesting dynamics at hand, as always, Dan, and some great insight that you have shared today. You said, in the coming weeks, a lot will probably have shifted. So looking forward to hearing those conversations in the week ahead and seeing really where this all plays out, because once again, still a lot up in the air.
I really sense that the markets are assuming all is well, and that all will continue to be well going on into the summer. And from, I guess, if we're hoping for Kansas farmers to have more bushels produced for their revenues, that would be, we hope they're right to some degree. Of course, the best outcome would be for us to have lots of bushels and then prices be sky high. That's for Kansas farmers' revenues. But overall, in the long run, if we have good yields, and hopefully the rainfall is coming and gives us the impact that the market, I think, is assuming will happen, that we'll have good crops, we'll have a moderation in price, and generally that would be, for the most part, a decent income year for Kansas farmers. But being a hand-wringing ag economist that I am, it's not even May yet. And we're assuming great crops, and there's a lot that can happen yet between now and then. And I'm curious if the fall-offs we've seen of late will sustain, or if there'll be some set of factors that somewhere in the U.S. or the world that'll come into play and raise prices down the road. But as of now, I think we're going on the assumption of normal crops and a moderation of prices, and we'll see if that holds up all the way to July and August.
Absolutely. Well, you've teed up the conversation for the rest of today's show. As always, you usually do quite well. Dan will be joined later on by Antonina Broyaka. She'll be providing a Black Sea trade update sort of segment there. And then we'll also be joined by Chip Redmond, of course, to end this week's programming with our Ag Weather Report. So thanks so much, Dan, for all the information you provided today and for teeing up the rest of today's show.
Thanks. Take care, Samantha.
Absolutely. You as well. Once again, everyone, that was K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien starting today's show with this week's grain market update. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and now we're tuning into a recent webinar that was provided by Antonina Broyaka. She, of course, is an associate here at K-State in our Department of Agricultural Economics, and she provided this webinar with recent information and an update on the Black Sea region of Ukraine. Today, she joins us to talk through some of the economic impacts of course, the Russian invasion on Ukraine, how over a year has now passed, and its continued impacts on the agricultural sector of Ukraine itself, as well as that impact on a greater scale globally. We'll tune into Antonina now as she describes some of the impacts that the war has had on Ukraine's agricultural land.
The black, extremely fertile soil was always the greatest wealth of Ukraine and the main mean of production that ensured high profitability of the agricultural sector. Unfortunately, 20% of Ukrainian arable land is still under occupation or damaged. 17.4 million hectares of Ukrainian territory are polluted with explosive objects. This is like a half of the territory of Japan, or 1.5 Greece, or double territory of Austria. Only 57,000 hectares of agricultural land was inspected and cleared. 5 million hectares of farmland is still considered mined. With the arrival of spring and the beginning of the agricultural season, the risk of explosion increases since farmers are starting going to the field more often. Significant part of the occupied areas, even if it would be mined, will be still not suitable for agriculture due to the physical damage from explosions, chemicals, petroleum, and heavy metals left in soil. It is necessary from 10 to 30 years to restore the soil fertility and return it to agricultural turnover.
Antonina continues with insight on how the agricultural economy of Ukraine continues to uphold the country's economy overall.
Despite the war, Ukrainian agriculture remained the main driver of national economy. Although we lost some of our position on world ag market, Ukraine is still top 10 in many spheres. Unfortunately, on sunflower oil market, where we always held the lead, we became second. Russia exported 3.7 million tons of sun oil, only 50,000 tons more than Ukraine. and 600,000 more than Russia exported last year, raising questions about its origin. Ukrainian export on sunflower oil was 815,000 tons less than in previous year. The main reasons of decrease are logistics, storage capacities, and power. It was easier to export sunflower seeds rather than crushing them for oil. That is why we rose from 4th to first place in the world sunflower market. Due to the destruction to Ukrainian industries, the share of agricultural export in total export increased for 13%, although the revenue from ag export decreased by $4 billion. The share of ag export to Europe increased from 27.7% to 55.2%. The share of Ukrainian ag export to Middle East underwent minor changes, but to Africa and Asia declined almost twice, and to Southeast Asia for 2.5 times.
The Ukraine native continues by explaining that trade has continued in the Ukraine through some unique alternatives to what the country is used to.
Under the limited access to the Black Sea, Ukraine was forced to look for new alternative ways. Railway transportation has been steadily increasing. However, it's pretty limited by the capacity of railway border crossing and the difference in gauge width in Ukraine and the European Union. After the launch of the grain corridor, 71% of the commodities was shipped by rail to ports and 29% to land crossing. Since November 2022, cargo volumes have been declining due to the constant shelling of energy infrastructure because our trains are mostly electrical, and also slowdown of operation of terminal. The capacity of 3 Danube ports increased. Currently, they are able to transship around 1.8 million tons of grain per month, and together with railway and trucks, they ensured in March over 3 million tons of Ukrainian grain export. Due to limitation of grain shipment via seaports, the share of grain delivered by land transport has significantly increased, and the diversification of transportation affected the geography of export. Romania, Spain, Poland, Italy, Hungary entered the top list of Ukrainian wheat importers. Turkey became the leader in the current season. Unfortunately, our wheat export to Indonesia and Egypt declined more than 7 times. China is still our biggest buyer of corn, but it decreased by 1/3. China would probably happy to replace this amount with corn from Russia that can be delivered across the land border, but Russia is not as such great producer and exporter of corn as Ukraine. Instead, we delivered more than 3.5 million tons of corn to Romania. Also, another European countries appeared on the list: Poland, Hungary, and Germany. On the barley market, again, new players are on Ukrainian market, Romania and Spain, but we lost our main market in China. Our export to China for now less by 12 times. On a sunflower oil market, Europe is traditionally the leader of Ukrainian export, but our second target market, India, declined purchase of sunflower oil for 40%. Instead, we have got new market in Turkey.
She shares how European Union interactions with Ukraine have evolved today.
So the bulk of the volume of exported grain to European Union was intended for re-export, since EU is traditionally a competitor for Ukraine on the world grain market. And before the war, EU usually had quotas and tariffs for many different ag products imported from Ukraine, such as corn, wheat, barley, honey, sugar, grape and apple juices, processed tomatoes, stretch, butter, poultry, etc. But in difficult time for Ukraine, good partnership relations allowed us to work beyond typical competition. A year ago, European Commission lifted all quotas and tariffs to support Ukraine. This really helped Ukraine to empty our storage capacities and cover at least part of the production cost for farmers. But unfortunately, Ukrainian grain overflooded European market, which caused a drop in prices, decreasing profitability on a European farmer. Ukrainian wheat export did not affect much European market, but EU already exported 7 million tons more of corn since the beginning of the season compared to the previous marketing year, and 4 million tons more of rapeseed. As a result, Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, and Bulgaria temporarily stopped Ukrainian import of specific egg products, but it is not limited for transit. Actually, the share of egg export to Poland and Hungary reached 14% of all Ukrainian egg export in the first quarter of 2023.
Antonina ends with insight on some of the interesting geopolitical issues also at hand.
On April 15, a ban on the import of agricultural products from Ukraine to Poland was introduced. Ukrainians were, of course, shocked with the decisions of our friend, but we understand that they need to protect their farmers and their economy. After a number of negotiations, the transit through Poland to third countries was resumed. And here is the list of egg products prohibited for import, among them grain, sugar, fruit and vegetables, meat, but no oil commodities. Poland will apply additional control to transit through its territory. Slovakia followed Poland and also introduced a ban on the import of agricultural products from Ukraine. The ban will not apply to goods transiting through the territory of Slovakia. All categories for transit must be sealed. Not all grains are prohibited for import, as well as oil and meat. Since the beginning of the war, 80% of Ukrainian egg produce is transported in transit through Romania. In second place is Poland, 10%, and the smallest transit is carried out through Hungary, about 5 to 6%, and Slovakia, 1.5%. Romania is still negotiating possibility of ban for Ukrainian import, but no decision has been made yet.
Once again, everyone, that was Antonina Broyaka, K-State associate in the Department of Agricultural Economics, giving us an update on the Black Sea region. This audio was taken from a recent webinar given by Antonina, which can be found on agmanager.info. The link to the full webinar can be found in today's show notes, which, as always, are located on agtoday.net. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today.
This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner for Samantha Bennett, and we are ending today's show with our usual agricultural weather report with K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. Chip, thank you so much for taking the time to come in and join us today.
Yep, thanks for having me.
To get us started, it rained in southwest Kansas.
It rained in southwest Kansas, and there was much rejoicing. It started basically Tuesday morning and persisted through Wednesday evening and kind of transitioned a little bit further east as well. But most of western Kansas saw moisture. Northwest and central parts of the state saw the least amount, generally a quarter or less. But as it got further south and west, like the Garden City area down to the state border, the tri-state border, Colorado, Oklahoma, and Kansas, we're talking 2 inches plus over that 2.5, 3 day period. And that's quite significant for that region. Some of those locations went over 250 days without a quarter inch of rain. And more without a half inch of rain. So that's a significant amount of moisture they haven't seen since basically last early summer. And when we look at things like winter wheat and all that, it really, really needed it. Winter wheat hadn't even came up. It was planted in the fall and it sat in the ground. And so this is a chance where if it's going to come up, it's going to come up now. And then additionally, we added some soil moisture across that region that hopefully will help out some of the summer crops as we move forward.
So definitely some much-needed rain in that region of Kansas.
Yeah, they average only about a half inch of rain a week right now. And if you go back in time, too, with no moisture the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks, even further, that we offset some of the departures of normal that we were accumulating that period. So it's not a drought buster by any means, but has definitely improved the short-term conditions down there.
The average precipitation you mentioned is usually a half an inch, so the 2 inches is very much celebrated. What is the average precipitation looking like across Kansas?
Yeah, so as we're getting further into spring, our average precipitation is increasing almost weekly. Eastern Kansas, in the Manhattan area, we should see about an inch of rain a week. And we get down into the southeast, they average a little bit more. We're talking an inch and a quarter, inch and a half almost. So when we look at a week like we've had for most of the state outside of the southwest and west, we haven't gotten that moisture. We've gone an inch in the wrong direction with dry conditions starting to show its face again. We need continual moisture.
We've also had cooler temperatures this past week. Is that going to continue to move forward?
Yeah, cooler temperatures has been associated with the rain in southwest Kansas and additional cloud cover. We did have a freeze across the state early this week that had some folks concerned. I haven't heard of too much injury at this point. It was still within the window of what wheat can tolerate, and some of the early corn, early soybean might have gotten slightly hit. But we've been warming up since then, and we're still slightly below average. We're offsetting kind of a warm start to April that we had and bringing April on average temperatures back towards near normal. Then as you look toward the future, we're seeing temperatures pretty consistent through the next 5 to 6 days with gradual warming as we get into later next week towards at to slightly above average temperatures.
As we move forward with the temperatures for next week, can people be hoping for rain?
Yeah, so the last round of moisture we're going to get is with a cold front, or weak cold front we'll get this afternoon and late morning. That'll bring about a widespread quarter-inch rain, and that's probably going to be it for the next week. There's some signs that later next week we'll start seeing an increase in thunderstorm activity in the western part of the state. That might push a little bit east, but right now widespread moisture doesn't look likely, and a lot of folks are going to increase their deficits of precipitation in the next week.
Chip, you mentioned your garden before we started. Do people need to water their garden if we're not seeing rain?
All depending on where you're at. In Garden City, you probably don't need to water your garden for a week or two. But Manhattan area, we're starting to dry out. We had drought expansion again this week on the drought monitor. And so we have a long ways to go before we erase drought, especially for areas like Southeast who are growing big deficits every week. We don't get precipitation. And there's a lot of concerns as well as surface waters depleting. There's some reservoir storage that's getting into concerning stages for this time of year in the Southeast. So depending on where you're at.
Definitely might be time to water the garden. Chip, thank you so much for coming in and giving us our weather report for the week.
Yep, thanks for having me.
That was K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond providing this week's agricultural weather report. We will be back with more on Monday on Agriculture Today.